That's the wail that we have to put up with." The words, whispered just a few feet away, sliced through the air like a rusty scalpel. They were meant to be a secret, a malicious little joke shared between a daughter and her mother-in-law. But in the hush of the grand Manhattan ballroom, they echoed with a cruel clarity. I felt my hands tremble, clutching a worn leather clutch that held nothing but my bus fare and a single, crumpled tissue. Just a second ago, the room was a blur of black ties and glittering gowns, a world so far removed from my quiet life in Queens. Now, it was a gauntlet, and I was the spectacle. A wave of shame so profound I felt it in my bones washed over me. I wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the elegant Persian rug beneath my scuffed shoes. But my feet remained planted, frozen in the cold reality of my daughter's words. Before we get to the rest of the story, please hit that like button if you've ever felt judged for how you look. And don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're listening from. My name is Catherine. I'm 65 years old, and for the last 40 years, I've lived like a ghost. After my husband, Peter, passed away when our daughter, Serena, was just a little girl, my life became a series of quiet routines. I'm a librarian, not the kind you see in big, fancy city libraries, but the kind who works in a small, old public library in Queens. It's a job that smells of old paper and dust, and the only sounds are the quiet turn of pages and the soft tapping of my keyboard. My clothes, a rotating collection of thrift store finds, are chosen for practicality, not style. My hands, with their short, clean nails, are a testament to a life of quiet labor, not manicures and luxury. Serena, on the other hand, lives in a completely different world. She's a successful marketing executive, married to a man from old money, Julian. She moved to a penthouse apartment in the city a decade ago and, for the most part, has only come to visit for the holidays, always with an air of polite impatience. She has never been outwardly cruel, not in a loud or dramatic way. Her cruelty is far more subtle and therefore far more cutting. She speaks of my simple life with a kind of pity that feels like a physical blow. She's always inviting me to more appropriate places, like a restaurant with a 3-star Michelin rating, only to get upset when I show up in clothes that don't fit the occasion. The invitation to her engagement party had come late and had been delivered with a sigh. She told me the party would be a small affair, but I knew she was just saying that. I knew she was ashamed of me. She even tried to convince me to wear a dress she had bought for me, a ridiculously expensive designer gown, but I refused. I told her I would wear something I felt comfortable in, and she simply rolled her eyes and hung up. So here I was, standing in the middle of a grand ballroom, a place so elegant it felt surreal. The air smelled of expensive perfume and champagne. The other guests were a blur of perfect hair and flawless suits. And then I heard it, a small, cruel laugh, and the words that had sent a chill down my spine. Serena and her future mother-in-law, Mrs. Miller, stood together, both dressed in gowns that probably cost more than my annual salary. Mrs. Miller was a woman who exuded a kind of sterile perfection, a woman who seemed to view the world through a lens of judgment. She was a woman who didn't understand the quiet comfort of a life lived simply. "That's the wail that we have to put up with," Serena had said, a small, knowing smile on her face. Her words weren't a shout, but a venomous little whisper, a secret meant only for Mrs. Miller. They thought I couldn't hear them, but I did. Every single word. My cheeks flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the room. My hands trembled as I clutched the small gift I had wrapped so carefully. It was a handcrafted book about the history of the library, something I knew Julian, a history buff, would appreciate. But now it felt like a foolish, pathetic gesture. I wanted to run, to grab my coat and disappear back into the safety of my small apartment and my familiar books. But something held me back. I had to face this. I had to see this through, for myself and for my husband's memory. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and began to make my way through the crowd, an invisible force in a room of glittering people. The cruel laughter from the cluster of guests near the champagne fountain was the first thing to shatter the elegant calm of the room. I had paused, clutching the small, leather-bound gift book for Julian, watching Serena and Mrs. Miller retreat to a quieter corner. They were sharing a private, conspiratorial smile, the kind that confirms an ugly truth about someone else. The whale reference had stung, but the casual, practiced ease with which Serena dismissed me was the real wound. I forced myself to move forward, telling myself I was here for Julian, the good man Serena was marrying, and for the promise I had made to Peter all those years ago to always be present for our daughter, no matter how much she resented it. I navigated the sea of silk and wool, making my way toward the corner where Serena stood. The tension only escalated when Serena finally saw me approaching. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of strained annoyance. She didn't greet me, but instead turned to Mrs. Miller and spoke in a tight, theatrical voice. "Oh, Mother is here. I told you she would make an entrance." Mrs. Miller gave me a cursory glance, her eyes lingering on my worn, dark blue dress, a color Serena had once declared positively depressing. "Eleanor," she said, using the wrong name deliberately, "a common snub. I believe your name is Catherine. Well, Catherine, I hope you enjoy the finger foods. They are quite spectacular." It was a subtle way of reminding me I was only there to eat, not to converse. I simply nodded, refusing to let the insult land. "Thank you. Everything is lovely, Serena. Congratulations." I held out the book to Julian, who managed to break free from his conversation just long enough to accept it. "Mrs. Baines, thank you," Julian said sincerely, his kind eyes a brief moment of relief in the suffocating atmosphere. "I'll save this for when things quiet down. I appreciate you coming." But before I could even reply, a figure moved into my peripheral vision. It was Mr. Marcus Miller, Julian's father, a man I knew by reputation to be a titan in the New York art world. He was distinguished, with silver hair and a sharp, bespoke suit that signaled genuine, effortless wealth. He had been listening to the conversation, his posture impeccable, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips when Serena had made her earlier, quiet jab. Now, however, his expression changed. Mr. Miller had been in the middle of a rather loud anecdote about his recent, massive art sale. The piece was priceless, truly. I decided to let it go, though, to a mysterious buyer, a trust in the Caribbean, I think. Paid an obscene amount, nearly $150 million, sight unseen. Imagine the confidence, or perhaps the madness, of such an individual. He chuckled, and the small group around him mirrored his amusement. But as he finished his story, his gaze drifted toward me, and that practiced, aristocratic smile froze on his face. He wasn't looking at my dress or my quiet demeanor. He was looking directly at a very small detail, the antique silver chrysanthemum brooch pinned to the lapel of my old coat. It was a piece I had inherited from my own mother, a quirky little thing I almost never wore. Mr. Miller took a slow, deliberate step away from his group, his eyes fixed on the brooch with an intensity that made the air feel thin. The low murmur of the party seemed to fade, becoming distant background noise. "Wait a moment," he muttered, the amusement completely gone from his voice. His voice was low, but it commanded attention. He slowly raised a hand, not to point, but almost as if to shield his vision. He looked at my face, then back at the brooch, then at my face again, the color draining from his cheeks. Serena, seeing her father-in-law suddenly transfixed by her embarrassment of a mother, stepped forward, her annoyance turning to confusion. "Father Miller, what is it?" Serena asked, forcing a light laugh. "Are you admiring Mother's antique jewelry?" Mr. Miller didn't even register her presence. His eyes locked onto mine, and the look of sheer disbelief that crossed his face was breathtaking. It was the look of a man who has just seen a ghost, or perhaps a financial anomaly that defied all logic. His voice, usually so booming and confident, dropped to a breathless whisper that nevertheless cut through the quiet tension he had created. "That brooch. I've only ever seen that design once. It's the hallmark of the Baines family collection. But, more importantly," he paused, swallowing hard, struggling to reconcile the librarian in front of him with the name he knew. "Aren't you? Aren't you the woman who signed the non-disclosure agreements for the Midtown land acquisition last month?" The small crowd that had gathered around him went silent. Serena's jaw dropped. The smile of judgment had evaporated from Mrs. Miller's face, replaced by an expression of absolute, paralyzing terror. Everyone waited, breathless, for the librarian in the worn coat to speak. The tension was a living thing, a heavy silence that pressed against the walls of the elegant room. Everyone, from the caterers to the most distinguished guests, had turned their attention to the unlikely trio. The wealthy, imposing art collector, Mr. Marcus Miller, My beautiful, suddenly terrified daughter, Serena, and me, the supposed whale in the thrift store dress. Mr. Miller's question hung in the air. Aren't you the woman who signed the non-disclosure agreements for the Midtown land acquisition last month? Serena was the first to react, her face a mask of frantic denial. Father Miller, what on earth are you talking about? This is my mother, Catherine. She manages the old library in Queens. She wouldn't know a non-disclosure agreement from a library card. You must be mistaken. Mrs. Miller, who moments ago had been radiating disdain, was now pale, clutching her husband's arm. Marcus, dear, perhaps you need to step away from the canapes. Catherine has lived in our lives for years. Trust me, she's not some land baroness. I remained silent, allowing their frantic attempts at reality control to play out. For 30 years, I had perfected the art of invisibility. I let people assume, I let them judge, and I let their arrogance fill the empty spaces with whatever convenient narrative they chose. My silence now was more powerful than any denial or confirmation. It was a hammer blow against the facade Serena had so carefully constructed. Julian, bless his genuine heart, was the only one who approached the situation with cautious curiosity. He stepped past his mother and wife, his eyes moving between his father and me. Mrs. Baines, is there something you're not telling us about your time before the library? It was the perfect opening. I looked directly at Serena, who was now pleading with her eyes. I could see the internal struggle, the shame of the insults she'd just hurled, fighting with the sudden, terrifying possibility that the person she despised held the key to a massive fortune. I finally spoke, my voice soft but utterly clear, a tone that cut through the background music and the nervous murmurs. Mr. Miller, I am that woman, and yes, I signed those agreements. And I also purchased your art collection for $150 million, sight unseen. The air in the ballroom seemed to crack. It wasn't a confirmation, it was a declaration. Mr. Miller let out a slow, shaky breath. He pulled a fine linen handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed his forehead. My God, Catherine, or should I say, the Baroness. That was the pseudonym used by the lawyers. I never imagined it would be you. He then did something truly extraordinary. He didn't ask about the money or the details. He looked at Serena and Mrs. Miller, who were standing rigid with shock, and said, Do you have any idea who you were speaking to just moments ago? This is not a librarian. This is one of the most brilliant, most ruthlessly anonymous investors operating in New York right now. The Midtown deal is set to redefine the entire city block, and you. He turned to his wife and daughter-in-law, his voice dripping with paternal disappointment. You called her a whale. Serena's face went from pale to a sickly white. No, this isn't possible. Mother has $20,000 in savings. She wears clothes from Goodwill. She directed her desperation at the nearby guests. Look at her shoes. This is a lie. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, meeting her frantic gaze with a steady calm. The clothes were a choice, Serena. The bus was a choice. For 30 years, I listened to people like you talk. I listened to the CEOs, the developers, and the arrogant money managers who thought the cleaning lady or the quiet librarian was invisible. I paused for effect, letting the weight of my words settle upon her. What you never knew was that the quiet librarian with her nose in an old book was absorbing every piece of information she could. The location of every undervalued property, the timing of every acquisition, the weakness in every major deal. I took the small investments I made from my part-time bookkeeping, and I turned it into a foundation. And that foundation grew. I bought the properties they discussed. I flipped the stocks they dismissed, and I built an empire with nothing but silence and second-hand information. Julian, whose face held an expression of awe, not shame, stepped toward me. The Midtown deal. It was rumored to be brokered by an anonymous party with limitless capital to consolidate all the smaller plots. That was me, I confirmed. And the price I paid Mr. Miller for his collection was precisely what he needed to cover his sudden financial liabilities. $150 million that he desperately needed, no questions asked. Mr. Miller nodded, his pride warring with his shame. It was the only way I could save face, frankly. The market has been brutal, and I never knew my savior was standing right here, being publicly insulted by my own family. The guests, now fully engaged in the high drama, began to murmur amongst themselves, their initial snobbery replaced by ravenous curiosity. The shift in the room's energy was palpable. I was no longer an embarrassment. I was a power player. And my daughter, the beautiful, successful Serena, had just publicly insulted the source of her future father-in-law's salvation. Her victory was ashes in her mouth. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, my gaze sweeping across the room, landing finally on Serena's trembling form. "I think the whale will be leaving. I have a $300 million portfolio to manage, and frankly, I've had enough of the company." I turned, and as I walked toward the exit, Mr. Miller quickly followed, trying to arrange a private meeting. Serena stood paralyzed, her glittering world collapsing around her, knowing that the woman she had spent years humiliating was now the quiet baroness who held the real power in the room. And she was also the key to her impending financial ruin. The air outside the Midtown banquet hall was cold, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the social explosion I had just set off inside. "Mr. Marcus Miller had caught up to me just as I reached the waiting sedan, a discreet black car that looked entirely out of place next to the yellow cabs lining the street. "Mrs. Baines." "Catherine," he stammered, his usual polished demeanor completely gone. He was genuinely rattled. "Please, just 5 minutes. I need to understand. I need to thank you. You saved my skin." I turned, giving him a cool, measured look. "Mr. Miller, I don't require thanks. I required a sound investment. Your collection was undervalued. I got a fair price, and you got a lifeline. It was business, not charity." "But the brooch," he insisted, his eyes still searching my face. "That brooch is identical to the private security image in the acquisition file. And the name, Catherine Baines. I know the lawyers use shells, but that level of personal anonymity, to stand there and be insulted while holding a controlling interest in half of Midtown, that's not just business, that's a long game." "The long game is the only game worth playing," I replied, opening the sedan door. "I'll have my lawyers contact yours next week to finalize the details on the new holding company. Good evening, Mr. Miller." I left him standing on the curb, bewildered, and gave my driver the quiet instruction to take me back to my apartment in Queens. It was an intentional choice. My secret had been exposed, but the life I lived remained unchanged. I needed to see Serena's reaction, not just the initial shock, but the follow-up, the inevitable scramble that would expose her true colors. Over the next 3 days, my phone, the old cheap burner phone Serena knew about, was silent. But my other phone, the encrypted one, was anything but. Marcus Miller's lawyers were in a frenzy, trying to figure out if they had committed a major ethical blunder by exposing the Baroness at the party. My corporate attorney calmly reassured them that the exposure was intentional, a move designed to consolidate domestic assets and prepare for a strategic family restructuring. Those were the words they understood: strategy, assets, structure. Then, the messages started pouring in from Serena. They weren't apologies at first. They were clumsy attempts at casual conversation. "Hey, Mom, still thinking about the party? So crazy, huh? Did Father Miller really think you were that person? Just wanted to check on you. The library must be busy this week, right?" It was all fishing. She was testing the waters, too terrified to ask the real question. "Do you really have $300 million? The fishing stopped abruptly on the 4th day, when the reality of her and Julian's financial situation hit them like a freight train. Julian's fledgling tech startup, which he had assured everyone was weeks away from a major funding round, had collapsed. The investors, spooked by market instability, had pulled out. The money Julian and Serena had leveraged to buy their expensive apartment and finance their lavish lifestyle was gone. They were facing a massive personal financial crisis. I found out the full scope of their despair, not from them, but from a private financial report I had commissioned. Julian's business debt alone was $400,000, mostly in personal guarantees he had naively signed. Their combined credit card debt was another $150,000, and the mortgage on their co-op was ballooning. In total, they were drowning in approximately $750,000 of debt, an amount that would be insignificant to me, but ruinous to them. The next communication I received from Serena was completely different. It was frantic, unedited, and raw. "Mom, please, we need to talk. Julian's company is over. The bank is calling. We are going to lose everything. Please, tell me the truth. Are you that person? Are you the Baroness? I waited another day before responding. I didn't call. I sent a simple text message from the burner phone. Come to the library. Friday 6 p.m. Alone. Friday arrived, and the library was quiet. The heavy wooden doors locked for the night. The smell of old books and floor wax hung in the air. I sat at my small, worn desk, the glow of the desk lamp illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Serena arrived exactly at 6. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. She was wearing a trench coat that looked too thin for the November cold, and her face was pale, devoid of makeup. The glamour was gone, replaced by desperation. She rushed toward the desk, her eyes red, and immediately started pleading. "Mom, thank God you answered. I'm so sorry. I am so deeply sorry for everything I said at the party and every nasty thought I've ever had. I deserve every bit of this, but Julian doesn't. You have to help us. Please, if you have even a fraction of what they say you do, please." I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded neatly on the worn blotter. "Serena, I have 2 questions for you. The first is, what do you and Julian owe?" She choked out the total, $750,000, repeating the number like a curse. "And the second question," I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper, "is how exactly do you plan to pay me back for 30 years of humiliation?" Her eyes widened, and the tears that had been welling up finally spilled over. She had expected a checkbook, not a reckoning. It was the moment I had waited for, the moment her need was great enough to force honesty. "I can't pay you back for that, Mom," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "There's no amount of money or apology that can undo the way I've treated you. But I will do anything you ask." "Good," I said, reaching into my desk drawer. I pulled out a plain manila envelope, not a check, but a thick, officially stamped contract. "Because I have a plan, but it's not a simple loan. It's a restructuring, and it comes with conditions." I slid the envelope across the desk, the heavy paper making a sharp scraping sound on the wood. "This is not about paying off your debts. This is about paying a price for your salvation. And it's not a price you'll like." Serena stared at the manila envelope as if it contained a venomous snake. The fluorescent lights of the library's back office reflected dimly off the thick, legal-grade paper. Her desperation to solve the $750,000 debt crisis was at war with a profound fear of the woman sitting across from her. A woman she now realized was a ruthless, calculating force, capable of absolute secrecy and overwhelming power. "A restructuring," Serena finally managed, her voice cracking. "What exactly does a financial restructuring involve when it's between a mother and the daughter who insulted her in public?" I watched her closely. I wasn't just offering money. I was offering a test. I was offering a mirror. "It involves a complete change of life, Serena. It involves paying the price in something far more valuable than cash. It involves humility." I opened the envelope and slid the 2 main pages across the desk. The document was a meticulously crafted legal sham, designed to look utterly terrifying, complete with official-looking stamps and boilerplate legal jargon. The heading, in bold, stark type, read, "Conditional Family Asset Transfer and Probationary Agreement." "Read it aloud," I instructed her. Starting with Section A, Financial Consolidation. Serena's eyes darted across the text, her hands trembling as she smoothed the paper. "A. Financial consolidation," she read, her voice barely a whisper. "In exchange for a total debt bailout of $750,000, plus an additional $100,000 for immediate relocation and essential severance costs, the beneficiaries, that's us, Julian and me, must agree to an immediate and complete liquidation and transfer of all existing personal assets to a trust managed by the benefactor, Catherine Baines." She looked up, bewildered. "Liquidation? Transfer? You mean we have to sell the co-op, the cars, everything, and give you the money?" "Everything," I confirmed. "You lose the house, the luxury cars, the jewelry. The trust will sell it all to pay back the bank, ensuring my initial outlay is protected. You will be left with only the belongings you can fit into 3 large suitcases." "But that leaves us with nothing," she protested. "That leaves you with exactly what you started with," I corrected her gently, "just without the debt. Now, read Section B. Serena's panic intensified as she scanned the next section, her eyes widening at the severity of the terms. B. Probationary relocation and severance, she continued, her voice gaining a desperate, high-pitched edge. The beneficiaries must immediately relocate to a city and residence determined solely by the benefactor. This probationary period will last for 5 years, during which all direct contact with the benefactor is restricted to pre-approved, monitored weekly calls. Furthermore, contact with all current social and professional circles, including Julian's family, must be completely severed. She slammed the document down onto the desk, the sound echoing loudly in the silent library. 5 years? Mom, this is insane. You want to banish us? You want us to cut Julian's parents out of our lives? This isn't restructuring, this is exile. You're buying our freedom from debt, but you're taking away our family. I am giving you 5 years to find out who you are without the crutch of wealth, status, or a mother you can publicly humiliate, I said, my voice rising slightly. You need to learn the value of $1 and the value of a relationship that isn't transactional. You need humility, and you need distance from the people who will only encourage your current lifestyle. And what about Julian's job? His career? She demanded. The agreement states that I will provide a modest stipend of $3,500 per month for your basic needs in the new, low-cost of living location I choose. You will both be required to find employment. Julian will have to work as something other than a high-flying tech executive, maybe a librarian, like me. I let a faint, cold smile touch my lips. Serena was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, the perfect makeup of her past life dissolving with her current distress. You're taking revenge. This is about revenge. The final clause, Serena, I said, ignoring her accusation and tapping the paper. Section C, renunciation of future rights. She picked up the document again, her eyes fixed on the last paragraph. Voluntary and irrevocable renunciation of all future claims, including inheritance, estate rights, and bequests, related to the benefactor's estate. If you take this money, you walk away from the rest of my fortune forever, I explained clearly. This is your one and only payment. If you choose this agreement, you acknowledge that our relationship is permanently changed. You get your solvency. I get my peace. She collapsed back into the small, uncomfortable chair, sobbing uncontrollably, the signed documents seeming to mock her from the desk. The silence in the library was broken only by her desperate cries. She had 2 paths now: bankruptcy and public disgrace, or a humiliating 5-year exile where she traded her luxurious past and all future hope of a fortune for immediate relief. I allowed her a full minute to cry. Then I spoke again. I need an answer by tomorrow, Serena. This offer is only valid for 24 hours. You need to talk to Julian, and you both need to look at this agreement and decide if $850,000 is worth losing your life as you know it. I stood up, closing the file and pushing my chair back. You can let yourself out. Good night, Serena. I walked away, leaving my daughter alone in the silence of the old library, surrounded by thousands of books, the very knowledge I had used to build the empire she now desperately hoped could save her. I had delivered the ultimate test of character. Now, I simply had to wait for her and Julian to show me their true selves. The walk back to their beautiful, but now terrifyingly mortgaged co-op in the Upper East Side was silent. Serena clutched the manila envelope containing the conditional family asset transfer and probationary agreement like a piece of glass she was afraid to drop. Julian met her at the door, his face etched with worry. He had been pacing for hours, waiting for her return from the secret meeting with the mother he now knew to be a financial leviathan. Well? Julian asked immediately, his voice tight. Did she confirm it? Is she really the Baroness? And did she offer a deal? Serena collapsed onto their expensive sofa, the cushions sinking beneath her, as if they, too, felt the weight of their imminent ruin. She didn't answer right away. She just stared blankly at the agreement. She confirmed it, Serena finally whispered, her voice hollow. She owns half of Midtown. She bought your father's art collection just to inject cash flow into his liabilities. And yes, she offered a deal. Julian sat down beside her, his breath catching in his throat. Okay, that's good. That's fantastic. We can pay the $750,000 and start over. What are the terms? A high-interest loan? A stake in your marketing firm? Serena handed him the document without a word. Julian quickly scanned the clauses, his confusion morphing into disbelief, then indignation. When he reached Section B, the probationary relocation and severance clause, he slammed the paper down on the coffee table. Are you serious, Serena? 5 years of exile, cutting off contact with my parents, and renunciation of all future inheritance? His voice was rising, a rare sound of anger from the usually placid Julian. This isn't a loan, this is a ransom. She's trying to buy us, not save us. It's $850,000, Julian, Serena screamed back, the stress finally breaking her composure. She's covering every cent of our debt and giving us $100,000 to disappear. We are literally facing foreclosure and bankruptcy. What choice do we have? We have the choice to keep our dignity and our relationships. Julian shot back, standing up and running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. We chose this life of debt, we chose the pretense, and we'll pay the consequences. I will not trade my family for a payment plan. It's easy for you to say. Serena's tears began to flow, but they were tears of fear, not repentance. Your family might be saved by your father's art sale, but my mother is offering us a guaranteed fresh start. I've spent my entire life being ashamed of her poverty. Maybe I deserve this exile. Maybe I need to pay for calling her a whale. Julian's anger immediately softened into deep concern. He knelt beside the sofa, looking directly into her frantic eyes. Serena, I love you, and I hate that this is happening. But listen to me. The price she is asking isn't financial, it's moral. If we sign this, we are confirming everything she thinks about us, that we are shallow, that money is the only thing we value, and that we will sell our souls for a bailout. He picked up the document, his finger tapping the clause about the $3,500 monthly stipend. Look at this. She's not giving us freedom. She's giving us a leash. She wants us to suffer, to live modestly, just to rub our faces in the hypocrisy. I can't live like that. I won't let her exile us from the people who love us genuinely, my parents, regardless of her money. But what if she's right? Serena whispered, her voice hollow. What if I am that shallow? I'm terrified, Julian. I'm terrified of losing all of this. She gestured wildly around the luxurious, debt-ridden apartment. Julian sat down next to her again and pulled her close. We will lose it. We will sell this co-op. We will sell the cars. We will take any job we can find. I'll go back to waiting tables if I have to. But we will do it together, and we will do it on our own terms. We will prove to her, and more importantly, to ourselves, that we are better than the people who humiliated her. It was a profound moment of clarity. Julian was offering a path of redemption through pain, a direct counter to my calculated path of humiliation through money. He saw the trap for what it was, a moral ultimatum. Serena pulled away, her eyes glistening with a new emotion, genuine conflict. So you want me to call her back and tell the Baroness we choose bankruptcy over her money? I want you to call your mother and tell her we choose family over her money, Julian corrected gently. And we are ready to face the consequences of our own mistakes. This is the only way we can ever earn her forgiveness. The hours that followed were filled with agonizing, whispered arguments, but Julian's quiet conviction began to chip away at Serena's desperation. He started taking pictures of the apartment, preparing the listing for a quick sale. He even cleaned out his desk, packing a few boxes with old books and photographs, the things that truly mattered. Just before the 24-hour deadline expired, Serena picked up her burner phone. She didn't call. She texted, her fingers hovering over the screen, typing the words that would determine their fate. Mom, we've made our decision. We refuse the agreement. We will find our own way out of this debt. But I want to earn back my relationship with you, not buy it. I need to talk about that instead. I was sitting in my silent Queen's apartment, reading an old book, when the text came through. I read it once, then a second time. It wasn't the answer I had anticipated, but it was the answer I had hoped for. The test had yielded an unexpected and incredibly satisfying result. Julian's moral strength had overridden Serena's ingrained avarice. It was time for the next phase, the surprise. The moment I received Serena's text message, refusing the conditional agreement, a profound sense of relief washed over me. It wasn't the relief of a battle won, but the quiet satisfaction of a lesson finally taking root. Julian's morality had forced Serena's hand. They had chosen a hard, painful path of honesty and struggle over the easy, humiliating path of my money. The test was over, and they had passed the ultimate clause, family over fortune. I immediately texted back, "Understood. The agreement is void. Come back to the library tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring Julian. I have a different plan." When they arrived the next morning, they looked exhausted but determined. Serena was still pale, but her eyes held a spark of resolve, a stark contrast to the desperate panic of the previous day. Julian, having clearly spent the night wrestling with the implications of their decision, looked tired but stood taller. They were ready to face bankruptcy. "Good morning," I said, greeting them not from behind my desk, but standing by the old card catalog, a place where decades of quiet research had taken place. "I want to commend you both. You made the hardest choice. You chose to keep your relationship with each other, and with your families, over the money." Serena looked confused. "So the offer is off? We are still going to lose everything?" "You are going to lose everything you leveraged," I clarified. "The co-op, the cars, the debt. You chose to accept the consequences of your actions, and that makes you worthy of the next phase of my plan." Julian stepped forward, his genuine concern evident. "Mrs. Baines, we appreciate that. We really do. But we can't take charity. We want to work our way out. If you can just point us toward a few contacts for job leads, that would be enough." I smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "Oh, Julian, you are such a good man. You don't understand. The test was never about the money. The money was bait. The true test was about humility." I then led them through the dusty, silent rows of the library to a back room, a room they had never seen before. It was used for storage, filled with boxes of old books, cleaning supplies, and discarded furniture. It was a mess. "Your new job starts now," I announced. Serena frowned, looking around the cluttered space. "Our job? What is this?" "This is the start of your debt repayment," I said firmly. "Since you refused the cash, you will repay me in the only currency I value, labor. For the next 3 months, you will work here, at the Queen's Public Library, under my direct supervision. You will not be paid a single cent." Serena's jaw dropped. "Work here? As in cleaning and sorting?" "As in grunt work," I confirmed. "You will be sorting, shelving, and cleaning this entire library. You will get to know the smell of industrial cleaning products and the feel of rough hands. You will experience the life you have spent 30 years ridiculing me for living. This is the new probationary agreement." Julian, surprisingly, looked intrigued. "No pay? What about our immediate expenses?" "I have arranged a temporary, rent-free, modest apartment in this neighborhood, just 3 blocks away," I explained. "It's a 2-bedroom. It's clean, but it's humble. Your food and basic utilities are covered by a small weekly allowance, enough to live simply, not extravagantly. You have lost the right to choose your clothes, your car, or your address for now. You have lost your privilege. You have earned the right to start over, from the bottom." Serena looked horrified. 3 months? No pay? This is worse than the exile agreement. At least that one came with a generous stipend and an easy out. That was a legal solution. This is a moral one, I said, my voice hardening. I want you to experience the physical labor and the quiet dignity of the work you dismissed as the cleaning lady's job. I want you to feel the quiet satisfaction of honest toil. You will begin today. You will report to the cleaning supervisor, Maria, at 1 p.m. She will instruct you. I handed each of them a pair of thick, blue rubber gloves and a worn library key. "One more thing," I added, looking pointedly at Serena. "During these 3 months, I will be watching you. I will be assessing your work ethic, your attitude, and your ability to respect the people you once looked down upon. Maria, the cleaning supervisor, is my most trusted asset in this operation. She doesn't know about my fortune, but she reports to me daily on the integrity of the people who work here. This is your second, more subtle test." Serena looked down at the rubber gloves, her fingers, usually adorned with expensive rings, curling in disgust. "You want us to become librarians?" "I want you to become humble," I corrected her. "And the time you spend here will allow me to set up the next, far more interesting phase of your redemption. Get to work." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the dusty room. The shock on Serena's face was palpable. She hadn't just been disinherited. She had been enrolled in the School of Hard Knocks, personally run by the mother she had called a whale. The physical labor and the mandatory simplicity were designed to break the illusion of her privileged life and force her to confront reality. Later that afternoon, I observed them through the small security camera I had installed in the back room years ago. Julian was diligently stacking boxes, wiping the dust from his face with the back of his hand. Serena, however, was struggling, dropping a stack of books and looking absolutely miserable, but she didn't quit. She picked up the books, wiped the sweat from her brow, and went back to work. The process of redemption had begun. 3 weeks into their forced labor at the old Queen's Library, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a dull, aching exhaustion. Julian and Serena were unrecognizable. Their hands were rough, their shoulders slumped from hours of shelving heavy books, and the expensive clothes they once wore had been replaced by utilitarian, slightly ill-fitting uniforms provided by the library. Serena, who had always paid someone else to clean her designer shoes, now spent hours scrubbing the grimy grout in the restrooms. She never complained to me directly, but I saw the frustration in her rigid posture and the way she violently attacked a stain on the reading room floor. This wasn't just physical labor. It was a daily, painful confrontation with the life she had once scorned. Julian, to my surprise, was excelling. He had a natural, quiet diligence. He organized the backroom storage, finding efficient ways to sort the thousands of boxes I had intentionally left in disarray. He even started volunteering to read stories to the few children who still visited the old library, earning quiet praise from Maria, the cleaning supervisor. Maria, a no-nonsense woman who had no idea I owned half of Manhattan, was my eyes and ears. She reported daily, praising Julian's humility and dismissing Serena's struggles with a shrug. The biggest test of this phase wasn't the cleaning itself, but the unexpected revelation that Julian discovered one dreary Tuesday afternoon. I had deliberately left a few clues, pieces of bread leading to a much larger truth. I wanted them to understand the how of my empire, not just the what. Julian was moving a heavy stack of discarded computer equipment, old, outdated monitors and towers, when he noticed a hidden compartment in one of the wooden shelving units. Inside, wrapped in a brittle paper bag, was a simple, sealed flash drive and a cryptic, handwritten note from me. To understand the present, you must examine the past. Julian didn't hesitate. He knew this was another test. When he and Serena returned to their small, subsidized apartment that evening, he plugged the drive into his old laptop. The drive didn't contain bank statements or deeds. It contained a single, meticulously detailed spreadsheet, dated 15 years ago, titled Project Phoenix. Serena looked over his shoulder, rubbing the fatigue from her eyes. "What is that? A tax report?" "It's a ledger," Julian murmured, his eyes scanning the rows of data. "Look at these entries. They're all small, private investment deals. Very specific, very niche. And wait, look at this one." He zoomed in on a line item labeled Midtown Tech Hub Initial Seed Funding. The date was 3 months before the official incorporation. The amount was small, $50,000. The recipient, a small, struggling tech startup named Innovate Core. Julian gasped. Innovate Core wasn't just any company. It was Julian's company, the one that had recently failed, leaving him with $400,000 in personal debt. "No, that's impossible," Julian whispered, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "That company was founded by me and 2 partners. It failed because we couldn't secure early capital from people like the Millers. We had to take out personal loans." He feverishly cross-referenced the names and dates. The spreadsheet showed that Catherine Baines, acting under the shell name C. Barnaby Investments, had provided the critical initial seed funding that allowed Innovate Core to launch and survive its first year. "She invested in my first company," Julian said, his voice thick with disbelief. "She saved us before we even knew her. She funded the venture that eventually led to my co-op and my life with Serena." "But wait," Serena interjected, pointing a grubby finger at another entry on the spreadsheet. "If she funded you, why did it fail last month?" Julian scrolled down to the last column, which was labeled Exit Strategy. Next to Innovate Core, the notes were chillingly clear. Exit, structured failure, divided by buyout. Target date, Q3. Profit projection, $1.2 million. "She didn't just fund us," Julian said, his voice laced with a raw, agonizing confusion. "She deliberately orchestrated the failure. Julian turned to Serena, his face a mix of pain and horror. She didn't just let my company collapse. She pulled the funding, triggered the failure, and then bought back the intellectual property at pennies on the dollar through another shell corporation. She orchestrated the collapse, created the debt, and then used the debt as bait to test us. This was the core of the second, far more sophisticated twist. I hadn't just gotten rich by luck. I had used my unique position, the invisible librarian, to gather insider knowledge, invest, and then ruthlessly manipulate the market, even sacrificing a small asset like Julian's company to achieve a greater strategic goal. The failure wasn't random, it was calculated. Julian was deeply wounded. She made me look like a failure. She let me spiral into debt. She engineered this entire humiliating ordeal. The discovery shattered the fragile peace they had achieved during their 3 weeks of labor. Their work at the library suddenly felt meaningless, a cruel joke. The next morning, Julian and Serena marched into the library, not to clean, but to confront me. They found me reading a worn copy of The Great Gatsby at my desk. Julian slapped the flash drive down onto the desk, the plastic clattering sharply against the wood. Project Phoenix, Innovate Core, $1.2 million profit. You destroyed my company, not because it was failing, but because you chose to profit from its collapse. You created the debt that you then offered to bail us out of. Why? Why the cruelty? I looked up from my book, my expression calm. Cruelty, Julian? Or education? That spreadsheet shows you exactly why the Millers, your future in-laws, were in financial trouble. They were too slow. They were too predictable. I didn't destroy your company, Julian. I taught you a valuable lesson about the ruthlessness of the real market. A lesson that would have cost you far more than $400,000 if I hadn't been guiding the failure. But you let us suffer, Serena whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. You let me call you a whale, knowing you had all the power. I let you suffer the consequences of your own pride, Serena, I countered, my voice firm. And I let you see how quickly your wealth and status disappeared when the foundation I built was removed. Now, you know the true cost of success. You know the true cost of failure. And you know the true cost of hubris. That knowledge is worth far more than the $1.2 million I made from Project Phoenix. The confrontation ended not with their defeat, but with a profound, terrifying understanding. They realized my money wasn't just a number, it was a weapon, wielded with surgical precision. They were standing face to face with a financial predator, a woman who had used her invisibility to become untouchable. And they finally understood that the debt was just a pretext for the ultimate lesson in humility and power. The confrontation over the Project Phoenix spreadsheet had been the pivot point. It stripped away the last layer of illusion. Serena and Julian no longer saw a victim or a generous benefactor. They saw the relentless architect of their misfortune, a woman who had orchestrated the very debt that threatened to destroy them. The shock was profound, but something unexpected happened. Their indignation gave way to a grudging respect. Julian, the aspiring tech entrepreneur, was the first to process the full magnitude of my power. He saw the cold, brilliant strategy. He spent the next few days not cleaning, but studying the Project Phoenix document I had left with them. You didn't just buy the intellectual property, Julian murmured to Serena one evening, huddled in their small, borrowed apartment. You bought the company's patent filings just before the official bankruptcy filing. That move saved you millions in legal fees and gave you a clean slate to relaunch the tech under a new shell. It was flawless. Serena, however, focused on the emotional cost. She let us humiliate her, just so she could teach us a lesson about pride and power. That's not a mother, Julian. That's a goddamn general. Their labor at the library continued, but with a different intensity. It was no longer penance, it was training. They worked harder, not for my approval, but to prove to themselves that they could succeed without the illusion of inherited wealth. Julian began using his time in the old library to research market trends on the public computers. Serena, while still miserable, started talking to the patrons, discovering a genuine human connection in the quiet community she once drove past with disdain. 3 months into their forced labor, I decided it was time for the final act of socialized revenge. This was the moment to shift the narrative from private humiliation to public healing. I sent them a simple text message. Meet me at the Metropolitan Ballroom, Saturday, 7 p.m. Dress, semi-formal. Serena and Julian arrived at the venue, the very place where Serena had called me a whale, their anxiety palpable. They were wearing the few decent items they had saved from the asset liquidation. Julian, in an old, well-maintained suit. Serena, in a simple black dress. This time, the ballroom was not filled with hundreds of people. It was an intimate gathering. Mr. Marcus Miller and Mrs. Miller, my corporate attorney, Julian's two former business partners, Maria, the library supervisor, and a few key people from my Midtown real estate acquisitions, people I had mentored or saved from ruin. It was a curated audience, a circle of individuals who understood power, humility, and the concept of a second chance. We took seats at a large round table. I was no longer wearing my thrift store clothes. I was in an elegant, tailored suit, the chrysanthemum brooch pinned squarely on my lapel. "Welcome," I announced, my voice clear and firm. "We are here for two reasons. First, to conclude the financial matter of Julian and Serena. Second, to discuss the future of the Midtown redevelopment." I looked at Serena and Julian. "You refused the bailout. You chose honesty and hard work over easy money and exile. For that, you have earned my respect." I then turned to the Millers. "Marcus, you recognized the brooch. You recognized me. That night, your family stood by and chuckled as my daughter humiliated me. Tonight, I want you to bear witness to the end of this debt and the beginning of a new foundation." Mr. Miller looked deeply uncomfortable. "Catherine, I cannot express how sorry I am for my family's behavior." "Your apology is noted," I replied. "But now, the debt." I slid a simple single page across the table. It was a clean debt forgiveness and mutual release document. The $750,000 debt is officially forgiven. It was an artificial construct designed by me to teach them a lesson. They have repaid the lesson in full with 3 months of honest, unpaid labor. Serena gasped, tears immediately filling her eyes. Julian looked stunned. "But the assets you liquidated? The co-op?" "The sale of your assets generated $400,000 in clean cash, which I have placed into a new, untouchable educational trust," I explained. "You lost your pride assets, but you gained seed capital. You start with $400,000 in savings, managed by this trust, which you cannot touch for 5 years." Then came the true socialized revenge, a public apology delivered by Serena, not as a cry for help, but as a statement of transformation. "I need to say something," Serena interrupted, her voice trembling but surprisingly steady. She stood up and faced the small audience. 3 months ago, I was a shallow, cruel person. I publicly humiliated the most important person in my life, my mother. I called her a whale. I judged her by her clothes, her job, and her bank account. I deserve everything that happened. My mother didn't seek revenge. She sought to heal my soul. She orchestrated my life's collapse to give me a chance to build something real." She paused, looking directly at her former business partners. "I ask for your forgiveness, not for the debt, but for the blindness that made me lose sight of what truly matters." The room was silent. Maria, the cleaning supervisor, was the first to break the silence. She walked over to Serena and embraced her. "You are learning, child. That is the only money that matters." The final twist of this chapter was the introduction of the new business venture. "Now, the future," I announced. "Julian, your company's intellectual property, which I acquired for a pittance, has been sitting idle. I am relaunching it as the Phoenix Initiative. It will focus on providing affordable, sustainable tech solutions to community centers and old libraries. Julian, I am offering you the position of Chief Operating Officer. Your salary will start at $120,000 per year, but you will not own a single share until you've proven yourself for 5 years." Julian, tears in his eyes, simply nodded. "I accept. Thank you, Mrs. Baines." "And Serena," I continued, "your work starts now. Your job will be Director of Community Outreach. You will manage the integration of our new tech into the Queens Public Library system. Your salary will be $75,000 per year. Your first task is to report to Maria for guidance on real community needs." Serena looked at the cleaning supervisor, not with disdain, but with genuine respect. "I will report to Maria," she confirmed, a true smile finally breaking through her exhaustion. The ultimate revenge was complete. Their social standing was stripped, their fortune was replaced with a purpose, and their debt was transformed into a moral obligation. They were not my heirs, they were my employees, earning their respect one difficult, honest day at a time. The public shame had become the very foundation of their redemption. The days immediately following the dinner at the Metropolitan Ballroom were ironically the quietest Serena and Julian had experienced in years. The overwhelming stress of the impending debt had been replaced by the daunting yet exhilarating challenge of the unknown. They no longer had a mansion to lose or a crippling $750,000 debt to fight. They were now employees, working for the most formidable woman they had ever known, and they had a clean slate. Their transition was brutal, but necessary. They moved into the modest, two-bedroom apartment in Queens, just a few blocks from the old library. They didn't try to make it look like their old life. They sold the remaining luxury items they owned, contributing the small amount of cash to their new, austere living fund. They were starting from zero. Julian, as Chief Operating Officer of the Phoenix Initiative, didn't start in a plush corner office. His first office was a repurposed supply closet in the back of the Queens Public Library, next to my old desk. His first task was to create a cost-effective, sustainable business plan for the organization, utilizing the very patented technology I had acquired from his failed startup. The irony was thick, but Julian embraced it. He was building his company from the ground up, this time with a clear mission and without the pressure of investor meetings and lavish expense accounts. He was working more hours than he ever had in his privileged life, but he was working with purpose. He was building tech, not for a Silicon Valley valuation, but for the community. His hands, once soft from endless hours of typing, were now calloused from hauling old equipment and setting up servers in dusty library basements. Serena's transformation was even more dramatic. As the Director of Community Outreach, her job was no longer about selling luxury products to the elite. It was about talking to real people. Her main supervisor was Maria, the cleaning supervisor, who had become my most trusted confidant and the living embodiment of the humility Serena lacked. Maria did not spare Serena. "You want to know what the community needs, Director Baines?" Maria would challenge her, using the formal title with a touch of dry amusement. "You come and clean the children's area with me. You'll find out fast what they need when you see the crayons they chew on and the sticky floors." Serena learned quickly. She found that the single mothers who used the library's computers weren't looking for free books. They were desperate for simple, reliable access to job applications. The elderly patrons weren't seeking bestsellers. They needed basic tech support to connect with their grandchildren. Her high-level marketing degree, once used to sell unattainable dreams, was now applied to designing simple, effective flyers promoting free tech literacy workshops at the library. One afternoon, Julian found Serena wiping down a sticky table in the children's section. She had a streak of colored pencil on her cheek, and she was singing a quiet, slightly off-key tune. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, leaning against the doorframe, a genuine smile on his face. Serena looked up, tired but radiant. "Mrs. Petrovich told me the budget won't cover a new set of tables for the children's area. So, I'm using a little trick Maria taught me, baking soda and lemon, to get this gum off the edge. And I'm singing because I realized this is the first time I've ever used my hands to make something cleaner, instead of just pushing money around to make something look cleaner." It was a small moment, but it represented a giant leap. Serena was finding dignity in labor, and she was finding a connection to the community she had spent her life trying to escape. Their relationship also changed. Back in their co-op, they had been partners in consumption. Now, in their small apartment, they were partners in survival. They cooked simple meals, they budgeted meticulously, and they talked about their days, not about their latest purchase, but about the satisfaction of fixing a broken library computer or helping a student find a rare resource. I watched all this from a distance, mostly through Maria's terse but approving reports. I moved into my new Midtown penthouse, a space that truly reflected my wealth and power, but I ensured it was minimalist, designed for work, not for ostentation. My life was now openly divided, the Baroness in the boardroom and Catherine, the working mentor, in the library. The two identities had finally merged, and I found a quiet peace in that authenticity. I scheduled weekly lunches with Serena and Julian, not at expensive restaurants, but at a simple diner near the library. These lunches were not about reconciliation. They were business meetings. I grilled them on their budgets, their community metrics, and their long-term goals for the Phoenix Initiative. During one such lunch, Julian shared his new vision for the initiative. "We're not just providing tech, Mrs. Baines," he explained passionately. "We're using the old library buildings as community tech hubs. We can retrofit them with your patent using low-power, open-source technology. It's scalable, sustainable, and it's a direct response to a real, unmet need." I nodded slowly, impressed. This was the man I had hoped Julian would become: innovative, grounded, and ethical. Then, Serena spoke, her voice filled with a quiet confidence I had never heard before. "And Mom, I'm finding that my marketing skills are actually useful for the first time. I'm not selling a dream, I'm selling hope. We've managed to increase community engagement by 40% just by changing the language on our flyers from free access to family connection. It works." She didn't call me Catherine or Mrs. Baines. She called me Mom. It wasn't a demanding, petulant mom from her spoiled past. It was a respectful, earned mom, spoken in the context of a working relationship. It was in that simple diner, over cold coffee and cheap sandwiches, that I realized my elaborate plan had achieved its true purpose. I hadn't just paid off their debt. I had given them a foundation built not on inheritance or pretense, but on sweat, purpose, and a shared moral code. They were finally building their own honest life, a life I was now proud to be a part of. The path to true reconciliation was long, but the foundation was finally set. It had been 18 months since the engagement party, 18 months since Serena had called me a whale, and 18 months since I revealed I was the Baroness. The time had flown by, not in a blur of meetings and deals, but in the steady, satisfying rhythm of meaningful work. Julian was thriving as the COO of the Phoenix Initiative. He had not only stabilized the technology platform I had acquired from his failed startup, but had successfully deployed it in 5 public libraries across Queens and Brooklyn. His salary of $120,000 was earned through grueling hours, but his job offered him genuine fulfillment. He was building, not leveraging, and his integrity was shining through. He had earned the respect of his former business partners, who were now keen to collaborate with the Phoenix Initiative, seeing Julian not as a debtor, but as a visionary with an ethical compass. Serena, too, had settled into her role as Director of Community Outreach. Her initial resistance had evaporated, replaced by a fierce dedication to the community she served. Her salary of $75,000 was modest by her past standards, but she was now negotiating grant proposals and overseeing a team of 2 interns, the first people she had ever managed based on merit, not nepotism. The co-op life, the designer clothes, and the social climbing were distant memories. She was leaner, tougher, and her smile was genuine, not practiced. Their small apartment in Queens was modest, but it was filled with warmth and the kind of quiet pride that comes from paying your own way. They rarely used the $400,000 trust fund I had created from their liquidated assets. They treated it as a sacred emergency reserve, a safety net they hoped never to touch. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but it was real. We had moved past the strained business lunches and into genuine, weekly family dinners. I would drive from my midtown penthouse to their small apartment, bringing simple food we would cook together. We talked about Julian's new tech deployments, Serena's community wins, and sometimes about Peter, the husband and father we both missed. One evening, after we had finished a simple meal, Serena and Julian sat me down on their small, comfortable sofa. The atmosphere was different, charged with a gentle excitement. "Mom, we have something to tell you," Serena began, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I looked at her, my heart swelling with a quiet sense of anticipation. Julian reached out and took Serena's hand, his eyes shining. "We're pregnant, Catherine. We're having a baby." The news hit me with the force of a sudden, powerful wave. I was going to be a grandmother. For 30 years, I had been focused on building a firewall of wealth to protect myself from pain. I had achieved $300 million in assets, but I had resigned myself to a lonely old age, having sacrificed family connection for financial dominance. Now, that firewall was being breached, not by debt or revenge, but by a simple, profound act of creation. I reached out, my hands trembling slightly, and took Serena's hands in mine. That is the most wonderful news, children," Absolutely wonderful. Serena's eyes, which had held so much greed and pain in the past, were now filled with a pure, unadulterated hope. We want to raise this child differently, Mom, she said softly. We want them to know the value of hard work, not the illusion of inherited entitlement. We want them to know their grandmother, the librarian, and the Baroness, from day one. No secrets, no shame. Julian nodded in agreement. We want our child to understand that the true legacy isn't how much money you have, but how you use it to build up the community, the way you've taught us. It was the ultimate vindication, the moment when the cruelty of the past was finally redeemed by the promise of the future. They weren't asking for money or an easy life. They were asking for my wisdom, my presence, and my authenticity. I let the tears come then, tears of joy mixed with the profound melancholy of knowing how much time we had lost. I have a proposal for you both, I said, reaching into my bag. Not for a contract, but for a simple, unbound charter. I've been preparing for this moment, not with a will, but with a foundation. I placed the document on the coffee table. The title, in elegant script, read, "The Baines Sterling Community Endowment for Ethical Innovation." I am converting half of my entire fortune, approximately $150 million, into this charitable foundation, I explained. It will be dedicated to funding exactly the kind of sustainable, community-focused tech that Julian is building. This is not an inheritance. This is a legacy of purpose. Julian read the document, his voice awestruck. $150 million, dedicated to ethical innovation. That's incredible. The charter specifies that the next generation of the Baines and Sterling families will manage the foundation, I continued. Your child will grow up knowing that their purpose is to oversee these funds, not to spend them. They will have access to immense capital, but only for the benefit of others. Serena looked up at me, her eyes shining with gratitude, not greed. It's perfect, Mom. It's the opposite of entitlement. It's responsibility. There is one final condition, I said, a slight smile on my face. I am stepping down as the head of the Phoenix Initiative. Julian, you are now the CEO. And Serena, you will be the executive director of the endowment. You will be partners in purpose, leading the charge. You will earn your fortunes through your work, and you will teach our grandchild that service is the only currency that lasts. They both leaped up, embracing me fiercely. It was the first time in decades that I felt like a true mother, and not just a bank account or a punching bag. The whale had found her purpose, and she had birthed a legacy far greater than any real estate deal. The life of isolation was over. The journey of genuine family had just begun. It's now 2 years after the initial, shocking confrontation. 2 years since the grand plan of socialized revenge concluded, not with a severed relationship, but with a profound, difficult reconciliation. I found myself in a place I hadn't been in decades, utterly content. My life was no longer divided. Catherine Baines, the quiet librarian, and the Baroness, the ruthless financial strategist, had finally merged into one authentic person. I still oversaw my $300 million portfolio, but I now did it from a sunny office with family photos on the desk, not from a shadowed corner of a library in the pre-dawn hours. The real triumph, however, was in the lives of Serena and Julian. Julian had transformed the Phoenix Initiative into a national success story. He had secured major contracts, not through my influence, but through the merit of his ethically sourced, low-cost technology. His original salary of $120,000 was now supplemented by performance bonuses tied directly to the growth of the community outreach program. He was a humble CEO, known for wearing simple button-down shirts and spending half his week in the field, not in boardrooms. Serena, as the executive director of the Baines Sterling Community Endowment, was a force of nature. She used her inherited marketing genius to raise awareness for social causes, securing grants and directing the foundation's $150 million capital toward meaningful impact. She was fiercely protective of her team and, ironically, became the most financially disciplined person I knew, scrutinizing every expense to ensure the money served its purpose. She found that selling hope was infinitely more rewarding than selling luxury. Their biggest achievement arrived 6 months ago, a healthy baby girl named Alice. Holding Alice, my granddaughter, for the first time was the moment I realized the ultimate victory of my long game. This child would never know the pain of conditional love or the shame of hidden identity. She would grow up with a grandmother who was both immensely wealthy and genuinely humble, whose power was used for creation, not consumption. The relationship with Serena was one of deep, earned respect. The $750,000 debt was never mentioned. The humiliation at the engagement party was rarely brought up, except as a dark memory of a past life. One afternoon, I visited their small but immaculate Queen's apartment. Serena was rocking Alice in a worn wooden chair, reading to her from an old book I had gifted them from the library. "Julian and I have been talking," Serena said, looking up, her eyes clear and calm. "We want you to know that we're truly happy. Losing the money in the co-op was the best thing that ever happened to us. We chose the hard path, and it made us real." "I am so proud of the people you have become," I replied honestly. "You proved to me that you were worth fighting for. And you proved to me that a mother's love can be tough, but it's always present," Serena countered. "It took a $300 million empire and an act of extreme social cruelty to get my attention. But you never gave up on me, Mom." She paused, then added, "I finally understand the difference between forgiveness and justice. You gave me justice first, and that justice earned the forgiveness. That was the core of our healing. I hadn't just forgiven her. I had imposed a form of poetic justice, a socialized revenge that forced her to change. The shame she felt was redirected into energy, giving birth to a purposeful life. The plot twist was not the money. The final, chilling twist was the realization that I had orchestrated the collapse to save her soul, not just my pride." The story of the whale became a private family legend, a painful reminder of the hypocrisy we must all guard against. The victory wasn't my financial dominance. It was the ability of a family, broken by pride and money, to heal and unite around the simple, profound purpose of helping others. The Baroness had retired her weapons, finding that the true worth of her empire was the legacy of good and the unconditional love of her granddaughter. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the consequence they deserve. It takes courage to choose tough love over easy forgiveness. Are you brave enough to be truly honest with the people you care about, even if it means risking the relationship in the short term for genuine love and respect in the long run? Think about that, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe.